Alright, really excited to be talking to you again. I've had this problem I've kind of been putting off. Oh, sorry, no sculpting helmet right now. It's middle of winter and my garage slash art studio is, what's the temperature here? Absolute zero? Just below absolute zero, so there's literally no molecular movement in my garage right now. I've got the heaters going, but since the molecules can't do what molecules do. Never mind. Okay, so the point being, I'm going hoodie today, going full hoodie. Okay, so with this stuff, I'm going to solve a problem. Here's my problem. This is what I've been putting off because I'm afraid. You can see what I started to do back here. He's got all these little strips of sculptural detail that happen around his rib cage, you know, like his inner thighs, just all these parts that are super hard to get into. And when I started sculpting this stuff directly onto the body, I'm running into this problem. Well, there's several problems. Well, let me show you. For an example, here's his kneecap armor piece, right? So in order to sculpt this, if you've been watching it all, you will have noticed that it took about 800 steps, and I would do some detail, I'd let it set, I'd do more detail, let it set, and I'm carving on it and I'm sculpting it. And both of those things require tools that have handles, and I have to get in at different angles, I have to see it from different angles, so I'm constantly manipulating it, spinning it around. All that stuff you cannot do when it's stuck to a giant sculpture. If I'm trying to get behind here to carve a little detail there, I literally can't do it because the handle hits the sculpture. And so that's a big problem for me. This is my potential solution. So, you know, failed attempt 1 was to just sculpt it right on there. That's not going to work. Attempt 2 was to make these. I basically rolled out my epoxy clay, got it on the basic shape. See, I did it on these inner thigh pieces too, and then I'm just using these thumbtacks to hold them in place. Here's the problem I'm running into. When I remove them in order to sculpt the detail on, there's no way to get these pins back in exactly the same spot they came from. Meaning that they're going to float around a little bit. It's going to be hard to keep things correct, I guess. So this is my solution that I just came up with. I'm going to kind of paint out the design, you know, all the various rib pieces and that kind of stuff. I'm going to actually paint them onto the surface. Then I'm going to put some anchor screws in. I'm just going to drill screws straight into that stick out just a little bit. And then I'm going to use this stuff called Worbla. This is what cosplayers use to make their armor. Well, some cosplayers use. It's kind of expensive stuff, but it's nowhere near as expensive as epoxy clay. This stuff is thermoplastic, meaning that you heat it up, you shape it, and then after it cools off, which should happen pretty fast right now in this garage, then it holds its form. So I think what that means is that I can have my anchor pieces in, I can shape it to it, let it cool, then I can pop it off those anchors, sculpt on it as needed, put it back on and off as much as I want. So that's the idea. I also have this other stuff. I got these 2 samples from cosplaysupplies.com, and this I think is some older material. Well, I'll see. I'm just going to play around with it. I watched a bunch of tutorials on it. My general rule of thumb is you've watched enough tutorials when you've heard the same thing about 5 or 6 times, and that means that that's pretty reliable information. So you'll learn along with me. Here we go. Alright, I'm going to start by marking out the pattern on the body. Is that what this is? Body? I think so. Okay, so this is another thing I didn't want to have to try to figure out because it's complicated. It's probably going to take some... You know what? I just had a brilliant idea. Rather than drawing it out... Well, let me explain the tricky part. The tricky thing is that his body is contorted, right? There's torsion on one side, and well, there's torsion all the way through, but then so half his torso is compressed, the other is stretched, and somehow I have to fit armor pieces on that are kind of equally distributed. So there's 3 strips. There's his belt, and then like another strip, and then another strip, and then there's some bony protuberances that happen around the rib cage. So somehow I've got to make them all be distributed properly. And I was thinking I would draw it on. Oh no, then I might have to erase some lines or paint over it or something like that. However, I don't know why I didn't think of this before. If I just use like a tape would probably work. Maybe big band-aids would work, or band-aids, rubber bands might work. Let's try tape real quick. So actually I should do these about half the width. Yeah, this way I should be able to reposition it pretty well. So we already know that the baseline goes where I've separated the torso into 2 pieces. So the third one, we'll probably do it on the most compressed side first, because that's where we're going to run into the most real estate problems. Right around here. I may have oversold it a little bit when I said this was brilliant. Let's just call it competent and leave it there. Alright, so it's a little high there. This is where it's really good to have good reference. Looks like they're pretty evenly spaced. It looks like there are 3 additional bony bits that stick out there. They go pretty high, like almost into the armpit, so I think we're good on space on that side. So basically, probably want to lower it there, because I don't think we want the bottom curve of the rib cage to be messing up the lines there. It's not very elegant. It's hard to really tell where it is on the game asset, because I mean everything's bending and warping around on it. And no, there's not actually fur there. Yeah, it's really hard to tell where the bottom of the rib cage is on the game asset. But I feel like we probably want the uppermost belt to be right at the bottom of the rib cage. So that means I'm going to have to compress these guys a little bit more. Okay, now I'm going to put the bone bits, or represent where the bone bits are going to be. Now, since the belt pieces are of variable thickness, there's parts where they go really thin and parts where they get thick. These are just basic guidelines. So the anchor pieces that I'm going to make are going to be thin, and they'll land between those 2 lines. But and then I'll build up the sculpt in the thicker parts where they need to be thicker. And I think I'm going to remove these guys. Just consider that practice work. Sometimes you have to do that. His delightful Speedo, I think I can still use. What I might do is maybe saw into them to give them a better, more stable anchor points, and put some, if the Worbla trick works, I'll anchor the corners with the Worbla. So I think it'll be about the same technique. Same with these thigh pieces. Here we go. So some of these anchor screws are going to require anchoring because this material has various densities and cavities in it. This just isn't very stable. So I'm going to fix that with some quick dry steel stick. I want the screw to stick out just far enough where it will make something that I can latch solidly onto, but not so much so that it protrudes to the point where it's cutting through the surface of the belt piece. Now, since I need to make these belts pop on and off, I'm going to have to make them in at least 2 parts, like a front and a back. I think basically they have to, because they're not going to be flexible, because this stuff is not flexible. The Worbla is a little bit, but it's going to have this stuff built over it, and I'm going to need to work on it, put it on to make sure it's fitting right and everything, pop it off, work on it, and repeat that process many times. So I think this is my current plan. We'll see how funny it is later. I'm going to do a front and a back, and then where they come together, I'll just have to clean up that little seam after those parts are done. So I'm basically doing 3 for each segment. So when it goes on, it'll have these guys to anchor it, so that those parts are permanently marked. This is where it will be, and then I'll do the same thing for the back part. 1, 2, 3. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark a parting line right now that will help me gauge where it needs to be. So what I'm doing, like if you look through here, you can see, well, where's the very edge of what I can see? And the very edge is here, it looks like. So now if we look at that line, theoretically, right here is where the 2 pieces of the belt will be able to join. And this curve here isn't so much that it will catch, and this curve right here isn't so much that it will catch. And on this side's probably a little more forgiving. I'm going to say it's about there. Yeah, that looks about right. Alright, time to dive into the Worbla. So my understanding is you cut the pieces that you want in the approximate shape. In my case, it's very simple because they're just strips. You use a hair dryer, sorry, not a hair dryer, a heat gun. I use this on my hair sometime when I'm in a real hurry, and that softens it up. You slap it on and it hardens up. So let's see how it goes. So I want to move stuff that's potentially flammable away from where I'm going to be heating this. I'm assuming all these little bits of particulate can easily catch on fire. paper could easily catch on fire. My understanding is it needs to be warm to the touch, but not scalding. There we go. Nice and malleable. So there's a sticky side and a less sticky kind of textured side. I'm going to do the texture side out since I want to be able to stick stuff to it. And then I'm just forming it around my little nubbins that I made. And I'm not pushing it, I'm not forming it around so tightly that it could kind of grab on and not be able to pop off. That would defeat the purpose. Alright, before I do any more, I'm going to let this cool off and see how it works first. Like I said, being absolute zero in here, it should cool off pretty quickly. Let these things cool overnight now. I'm going to pop them off. Hopefully. Let's see if they pop off. Let's see, shall we? Okay, you can see it's holding its shape great. It's flexible. It's more flexible than it will be once I put all the epoxy clay on it. Let's see if it pops back on. Oh, that's delightful. Just kind of snaps on and off. Wow, so cool. Let's see if I got lucky with the rest. It looks like in the places where I heated it while it was on the surface, as opposed to heating it on the aluminum foil and then putting it on the surface, it looks like it may have kind of glued itself to the surface a little bit, which I don't think is a problem. Just gotta pry it off. We shall see. Now in some of these places, you can see on the edges here, what I was trying to do was make a little kind of U-shaped latch that I could wrap around these nails that I have sticking out. And I may have got a little too aggressive with how tight I made that. But again, the fact that I can just heat it and reshape it means it's really not a big deal. So you can see here, this, when I was heating it up on that, you know, this, whatever this paper mache fuzzy cottony surface is, it bonded with that glue a little bit, so it's kind of tough to pull it off. Also, it looks like, you can see I pressed it in around this screw a little too much. So I think all of these things, I'll just heat it up a little bit, and that relaxes the stuff, and then put it back on in a less grippy way. That should probably fix that. Let's see. I'm gonna scrape the paper mache gunk off of there just so I don't risk it catching fire or something. Here's another case where I obviously squeezed the heated material too tightly around the anchor pin. So I'm gonna have to heat that up again, and I think that'll relax it. I think these guys, these little rib guys, I'm gonna leave up there until I'm ready to sculpt those. Trying to focus just on the architectural bits right now. Blew a fuse. I guess one too many heaters going, which is apparently 2. Plus this, I guess that's 3 heaters. One thing I'm noticing is that as I'm heating one of the strips, it's kind of softening the other ones, and then they're melting and falling off. So I'm going to use some foil to deflect that heat, so I can isolate the element that I want to heat. Mainly that element. Alright, and the final thing I think I need to do is I probably need to break his loincloth in half, give him a front and the back, because I'm thinking that the amount of flexing that goes on when I take it on and off, it's not going to play so well once I get the layers of detail on there. I might crack it or have to break it to get it on. So if I break it in a controlled way right now, then when I put it back on, it won't be a problem. That actually hangs on there just fine. I thought I was going to have to put all sorts of new anchors in there, but looks like it's going to work great. Okay, I guess the next step is to pop these guys off and start sculpting architecture on them. One thing I'm going to do for sure is label them. I think I will put an arrow indicating which way is up, and let's see, so this would be front, so I'll put an F, top, and then I'll have a front middle and a front bottom. Yes, that should work. Okay, real quick, I just want to show you a couple upgrades that I made to the old art studio recently. The first thing I've got here is a roll of paper that I mounted to the table here. This is because I was, as I'm looking over the footage and stuff that I have, I noticed a lot of problems with white balance because I was using either a light background or aluminum foil, which was reflecting a lot of light. So I needed a really neutral thing, and they get dirty, and so I was looking for an economical solution. This is what I came up with. Thought it was pretty clever. So basically, it gets messy, right? And then you just pull it down, cut it off, nice clean surface. Viola. Okay, the other things are over here in my sanding nook. You can, come on back here. So I've got this this plastic here, both because it serves really well as a kill room, all the blood spatters on there, and also because it keeps the sand, all the dust particulates from getting over there. I was tired of breathing it, so I got a mask, and so this is the other feature I've got. I basically took a box fan here and attached this, what is this? This is like batting or some kind of quilt stuff that you put in blankets. I don't know. Whatever it is, it makes it so when you turn on the fan, it sucks air through. So it's basically a filter. That's what it comes down to. Anyway, what that does is gives just enough suction so that all these little particulates that float off of my stuff go that way instead of into my face. Okay, so this is a belt sander. I got it for Christmas. It's super cool. This particular brand, I just wanted to warn you about, Central Machinery. It's super cheap, and it's super cheap. It was crappy. I had to spend hours kind of making this wonky little base actually flat, so that when you sand stuff on it, it's not going to come out crooked and stuff. And this is the other thing that I got recently. Found it on Craigslist for like 30 bucks or something. And this is not a jigsaw, a scroll saw. And what a scroll saw does is essentially exactly the same thing that a jeweler's saw does, right? So if I need to cut little sheets of stuff like styrene for the patterns that I'm making on the Colossus armor, this will just do it much faster. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Let's get back to work. Trying to figure out the best way to do these, what is it? This kind of work, right? Where there's all this little intricate detail and stuff. To make it thick enough, I need really thick styrene or some kind of material to cut. Scissors, you can't do that with scissors. With the X-Acto knife, it just takes a brutally long amount of time. The jeweler's saw, same thing, it would take a long time. So I'm hoping that with this new stuff I will be able to make stuff better and more faster. Okay, so let's get back to work. Stop slowing me down, I've got work to do. So this is my first go at approaching how I was going to do the tiles for the base. I started by cutting out some styrene and then sculpting several individual tiles. So here's my first tile, and I'm making a press mold of it with this yellow mold material. And then I fill the mold up just by pressing more epoxy clay in there, and I'll be able to make variations from that. And here you can see I'm laying them out on a grid. I'm pressing individual ones because I want them all to be slightly different. And I'm keeping them kind of hollow in the back so that I can crack and break them easier. I'm trying a different brand of epoxy clay called Magic Sculpt here. Let's see how it works out. Sadly, I can't find the footage of the technique I did where I poured water putty into the mold and made these tiles and then smashed them with a hammer and then glued them back together. But here's the end result, is I'm trying to make a set of these that I can then make multiple copies of. If you want something to look like shattered or broken stone, there is absolutely no substitute for actually shattering some stone. The crispness that you can achieve with the cracks, it's just unparalleled. I have not been able to reproduce this look with tools. I'm sure some people can do it, but I have no idea how they do it. So this brute force method works really well for me. And something I learned from creating textures for video games is that you can get away with repeating tiles pretty frequently as long as you're rotating them and kind of keeping them randomized. So I'm making a palette of, a dozen or so of these cracked tiles, and then they're going to be placed kind of intermittently with uncracked tiles. Okay, so here I'm building a little mold box out of foam core and gonna pour some rubber in to make a mold for these guys. I have a couple videos about mold making if you want to check them out. They're in the backlog. And I think the rubber I'm using here is probably Umu, which I don't recommend, but it works fine when you're just making a limited number, especially of very shallow things like these tiles. Hey, look at this, we made it to summer. Yeah, remember how cold it was at the beginning of this episode? Now it's like blasting hot and I can't even work in my garage. So anyway, yeah, like doing some filling in the gap with this stuff. And just trying to make the head sit into the neck hole nicely so that I can pop it in and out easily. So that just requires many layers, built up and sanded and built up and sanded. And on it goes.